Your mind is racing, your chest feels tight, and the world around you is turning into chaos. Why does anxiety feel like a prison inside your own head? In this profound analysis, we break down the transformative wisdom of Dr. Omar Suleiman on overcoming existential struggle and anxiety. You know, there actually is a way out of this psychological suffocation. In this explainer, we're going to look closely at the precise tools you need to map your way back to peace. Section 1. The Prison of Anxiety, Acknowledging the Suffocation. Okay, let's dive into this. The very first step to breaking out of any prison is understanding the walls that surround you, right? When we become completely paralyzed by global or personal trials, there's actually a specific part of our anatomy that is crying out for help. To really understand this, we have to define the qalb. In this framework, the qalb is the spiritual heart. Now, I want you to think of it just like a vital physical organ. It requires its own very specific, very vital form of sustenance just to survive, let alone function properly. When we experience that profound, heavy constriction in our chests, it isn't just physical stress. It's the qalb starving. It is literal spiritual and psychological suffocation because your heart is being deprived of its essential nutrient. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we mean. Just look at this comparison. On the left, we have a fish without water or a human being without oxygen. It's complete, immediate suffocation. On the right, we have the qalb without the remembrance of Allah. According to Dr. Suleiman, the relationship is exactly the same. When you turn away from this remembrance, things become instantly constricted and tight. You quite literally cannot operate. But the moment you reintroduce it, those pathways open right back up. Section 2. Oxygen for the qalb, the true experience of dhikr. So if the spiritual heart is suffocating, how do we pump oxygen back into it? How do we actually settle the mind and unlock a level of tranquility that absolutely nothing else in the material world can provide? The answer is dhikr, the profound remembrance of Allah. Now, this is not just some passive thought. It is an active alignment of the tongue, the mind, and the heart. When these three things perfectly align, they unlock sabr, which is patient endurance. In the absolute worst of times, when madness just seems to strike mankind, this remembrance quite literally becomes your food and your drink. It's an incredibly powerful, active tool for psychological survival. But how do we actually do it? Well, Dr. Suleiman notes that true dhikr isn't just mindless chanting. It actually happens in 3 distinct stages. First, repetition on the tongue. Second, thinking deeply about what you are actually saying, really remembering who Allah is while you speak. And third, allowing that profound meaning to truly penetrate your heart. When you practice it holistically like this, it physically and spiritually opens those constricted pathways. It's exactly what allows you to breathe again when the world is closing in on you. And this is a tremendously comforting truth for anyone feeling overwhelmed right now. Allah does not burden a soul beyond its scope. He gives us the tools of success. You see, we aren't expected to just magically endure impossible situations entirely on our own. No way. We're given the precise tools we can actually handle, like dhikr, to navigate the struggle. And a major takeaway from the source material is this. We are only held accountable for our struggles because we've already been equipped with these exact tools for success. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the room temperature metaphor. You might be watching this and thinking, okay, but does this actually work? Well, looking at this from the outside is kind of like looking at a cool, air-conditioned room through a window. You can clearly see the people inside aren't sweating, but you don't actually feel the coolness yourself, right? You won't truly understand it until you immerse yourself in it and become one of the people of remembrance. If you want to know what it feels like, Dr. Suleiman points to the profound tranquility people feel during the last 10 nights of Ramadan, that deeply immersive, cool peace. But that state of dhikr isn't just reserved for Ramadan. It's available to you right now. Section 3. Breaking the paralysis cycle, the anatomy of inaction. Let's move to this next part and see how this builds. If we have the oxygen, why do we still feel so stuck? We really need to look at the actual anatomy of our inaction. How exactly does distress trick us into becoming completely paralyzed, and how do we systematically break that chain? Based on a supplication from the Prophet, there is a direct pipeline of distress. It starts with step 1, anxiety about what is to come. Then, step 2, grief over what has passed. Now, if a person dwells too much in this anxiety and grief, it triggers step 3, incapacity, where you feel completely unable to act, which inevitably leads to step 4, laziness, where you're struck by total inaction. It's a vicious physiological and psychological trap. You absolutely have to turn to Allah to unlock these specific chains. And here is a highly practical, everyday example of how dhikr breaks that exact paralysis. It can be as simple as just saying Bismillah when you walk out your front door. With that one single word, you are verbally shifting the massive burden of the unknown. You're acknowledging, whatever happens today, I trust that Allah is my protector, my provider, and has the keys to the system. Because look, even if the system acts in ways you don't understand, the keys aren't in your hands anyway, right? This profoundly simple act of remembrance stops paralysis in its tracks because you're no longer trying to carry the weight of the entire world on your own shoulders. Section 4. Action in times of doubt. Navigating the confusion. But what happens when the world is completely upside down? Often, we experience what is known as fitna, or intense confusion, where the path forward is just totally obscured, both globally and personally. Dr. Suleiman highlights an explicit framework from the Prophet for navigating this exact type of madness. Leave that which causes you doubt, and immerse yourself in that which causes you no doubt. When things are incredibly confusing and you simply cannot figure out the best course of action, the absolute worst thing you can do is sit there in paralyzed rumination. You have to abandon the confusing doubts and anchor yourself in actions that are undeniably absolutely certain. So the crucial point here for overcoming fitna, or chaos, is this 3-step survival guide. Number 1, acknowledge the profound confusion. You don't have to figure it all out right now. Number 2, exert yourself in a place where you know your course of action will be blessed. Just stick to the absolute basics of goodness. And number 3, never, ever stop moving. The real cure for existential dread isn't magically having all the answers. It is purposeful, continuous motion in a positive direction. In fact, the source material emphasizes a very specific mandate during times of intense trial. It doesn't just say, do good deeds. It literally says, rush to do good deeds. When fitna comes towards you, when the chaos feels like it is closing in on your chest, you have to exert yourself. You have to sprint toward the good. Action is the ultimate antidote to that suffocating prison of anxiety. Which leaves us with this final, absolutely critical thought. The world will always have its trials. The chaos? It probably won't stop. But you have the tools now. You have the dhikr to give your heart oxygen, the sabr to endure, and the clear path to leave doubt entirely behind. So the question is, when the walls feel like they are closing in, will you let the anxiety paralyze you, or will you rush toward the good? Take these tools, step inside the room, and let your heart finally breathe. Thank you for joining me for this explainer.
Usually, when we talk about physical pain, there's a really clear, logical sequence of cause and effect, right?
Yeah.
Like we all implicitly understand it.
Oh, absolutely. It's a simple biological equation.
Right. You stub your toe on the edge of the bed frame and immediately it just throbs. Or, you pull a muscle, lifting a heavy box, and there's this sharp, very localized ache right where you strained it.
Yeah, exactly where the tissue was strained. It makes sense to us. It's binary, and it's completely predictable.
Exactly. Our brains evolved to process that. Tissue damage just equals pain signals.
And because we understand that mechanism, we can usually fix it. Or, at the very least, we can contextualize it. We can tolerate it until it heals because that predictability gives us control.
But then, you step into the realm of the modern mental state, and that predictable equation it completely shatters.
It completely falls apart.
Yeah. Think about this scenario, right? You wake up on just a completely ordinary Tuesday morning. You haven't run a marathon. You haven't been in a physical accident. There's literally no visible bruising anywhere on your body. The room is quiet. The temperature is fine. You're physically completely safe.
Completely secure in your environment.
Right. And yet before you even throw the covers off, there is this crushing, suffocating weight sitting right on the center of your chest.
A heavy dread.
You try to take a deep breath, but the air feels incredibly thin, like you're trying to breathe through a straw. The panic just starts rising in your throat. And the absolute worst part of this entire experience.
The math doesn't add up.
Exactly. You look around your perfectly safe room, you scan your perfectly healthy body, and nothing is physically wrong with you.
Which is what makes the feeling infinitely more terrifying, honestly. To modern psychology, that is the defining phenomenology of an anxiety attack.
It really is.
It's the absolute definition of psychological suffocation, that invisible constricted chest. It's basically an alarm bell ringing at full volume in a completely empty house.
Oh, wow. An alarm bell in an empty house. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, your body's preparing for a mortal threat that simply does not exist in the physical space.
And that deeply unsettling, just incredibly common feeling is exactly where we're starting today.
Yes.
So if you're listening to this right now, you know that feeling of the constricted chest, that existential dread that seems to just hover in the background of modern life. We want you to know you're not crazy.
No,
And you're definitely not alone. It's fed by a mix of your own personal struggles and, well, whatever global crisis is currently trending.
which is always something these days.
Always. So today, we are embarking on a really deeply therapeutic deep dive into the raw, emotional, and psychological struggles of modern anxiety, panic, and overthinking.
And our source for this deep dive is a profoundly insightful lecture by Omar Suleiman.
Right. And I have to say, what's genuinely compelling about this specific source material is the intersection of disciplines here.
It really is fascinating because, while we are looking at a theological text, a spiritual lecture, what Omar Suleiman is actually laying out is an incredibly robust cognitive behavioral toolkit.
Yeah, this isn't just theory.
Exactly. It's certainly not abstract philosophy meant to be debated in some ivory tower. It is a highly practical, grounded guide for surviving the sheer psychological madness of the modern world.
So we're essentially approaching this as a forensic examination of human psychology under intense pressure.
Yes.
Yes.
Looking at how ancient spiritual frameworks accurately map onto our modern understanding of the nervous system.
I love that. Okay, so let's look at the actual psychological anatomy of a trial, what this source refers to as a fitna.
Right.
And let's decode exactly why it causes that crippling physical paralysis we were just talking about. Suleiman describes this phenomenon where modern circumstances can literally make a person feel like they cannot move.
Yeah, they cannot operate.
Whether that's absorbing the global news, watching the economy fluctuate, or just navigating heavy circumstances inside your own home. He specifically uses the words suffocating and constricted to describe that internal state.
And if we trace this back to how the human nervous system operates under chronic stress, his description it's clinically precise.
Clinically precise how?
Well, the source text points to a very specific traditional prayer. It serves as a plea to be protected from two incredibly powerful, polarizing emotional states.
Okay, what are they?
Anxiety about what is to come and grief over what is past.
Wow. Anxiety about the future and grief over the past. So we're talking about two entirely different directions on the timeline of our lives.
Precisely. You're being pulled in two directions.
Yeah.
And Suleiman draws a direct causal line from dwelling in those two states to a resulting state of what he calls incapacity and laziness.
Wait, laziness?
Yes.
That feels a bit, I don't know, judgmental.
Right. And we need to be incredibly careful with how we interpret that word laziness in this context. It carries so much cultural baggage.
Yeah, it implies it's your fault.
Exactly. But in the context of modern psychology and trauma response, when a human being is constantly ping-ponging between mourning what has happened in the past and being terrified of what might happen in the future.
They completely annihilate their capacity to exist in the present moment.
Yes. Your brain's cognitive load is finite. When it's completely maxed out by time traveling, there is nothing left for the now.
Okay, think about the processing power of a computer.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. If you have a computer with 100 heavy applications running simultaneously, let's say 90 of them are rendering high-definition videos of your past regrets and failures.
Sounds exhausting.
It is. And then the other 10 are generating these horrific, complex simulations of future catastrophes.
The machine is going to freeze.
Exactly. That computer's going to freeze. The mouse stops tracking. The keyboard becomes unresponsive. And if you look at that computer, you wouldn't say the machine is lazy.
No, you'd say it's overwhelmed, entirely incapacitated by the processing demand.
It literally lacks the available RAM to execute a simple present moment command, like just opening a new blank document.
That is a highly accurate way to conceptualize the neurological reality here. The laziness he mentions isn't a moral failing.
Right.
It isn't a lack of willpower, and it certainly isn't physical lethargy. It is a profound psychological paralysis.
Because the mind is so exhausted.
Utterly exhausted by the relentless, demanding algorithms of grief and anxiety. The body's only protective mechanism at that point is to power down into a freeze response.
You literally do not have the energetic or metabolic resources left to take meaningful action.
Exactly.
I want to ground this in a behavior that almost everyone listening has likely engaged in recently, which is doom scrolling.
Oh boy, yes. The ultimate modern paralysis.
I mean, consider the mechanics of it. You sit down on the couch after a long, stressful day, you open up your phone, and you just start absorbing the absolute worst news humanity has to offer.
You read about a war on another continent.
You look at charts showing an impending economic collapse. You watch videos of environmental disasters, and you are physically safe on your couch. But neurologically.
Neurologically, you are in a war zone.
Yes. And before you know it, 2 hours have passed. Your chest is incredibly tight, your breathing has become incredibly shallow, and your heart rate variability has just plummeted.
And you physically feel like you cannot get up to go make dinner. You're completely paralyzed.
Exactly. What is happening there? You're absorbing global, macro-level anxiety about the future, layering it with profound grief for the victims of the past. And it violently crushes your capacity to operate in the present.
You are experiencing a systemic overload. And the source text points out that when you turn away from your anchor, from what it calls the remembrance of Allah, things become tight and constricted.
The pathways literally close up.
They do. Your peripheral vision narrows, your focus becomes entirely threat-based, and that suffocation sets in.
Okay, wait, hold on. I want to challenge this framing a bit, because this is where spiritual texts can sometimes really alienate a modern listener.
How so?
Well, when someone is paralyzed by a clinical panic attack, telling them they're suffering from spiritual suffocation because they lost their anchor, it can sound incredibly dismissive.
I can see that. It can sound like victim blaming.
Right. The natural reaction is to think, oh, great, so I'm being punished for not being spiritual enough. I have a chemical imbalance or a trauma response, and this text is telling me I'm just bad at faith.
Yeah, that's a very valid reaction.
So how does modern psychology reconcile that seemingly harsh theological framing? Is this constriction a punishment?
That is the crucial tension. And honestly, addressing it completely changes the paradigm of how we view our own anxiety.
Why?
It is fundamentally not a punishment.
It's not.
No, it is an alarm system. Let's look at your body's biological responses to deprivation. If you stop drinking water for 2 days, what happens?
Your throat becomes incredibly dry. You get a blinding headache.
Right. Your skin loses its elasticity. Now, is your body punishing you for being a bad person?
No, obviously not.
Absolutely not. Your body is desperately, biologically signaling that you are lacking an essential element for your continued survival.
Oh, okay.
The constriction of the chest, the psychological suffocation Suleiman is describing, it functions in the exact same way. It is an acute, sophisticated alarm system.
So it's your mind signaling that you drifted into dangerous waters.
Yes. The unlivable waters of the uncontrollable future and the unchangeable past. And you are running out of oxygen.
So the tightness isn't a penalty, it's a diagnostic indicator.
Precisely. Suleiman is providing an ancient, deeply resonant description of a physiological panic response.
The pathways literally feel closed because your sympathetic nervous system has just taken over.
Exactly. Your body is restricting blood flow to your digestive system and higher cognitive centers, routing it to your limbs to prepare you to fight a tiger.
But there is no tiger.
There is no tiger. There is just an email or a news article or a memory.
And because that physiological panic is triggered by a psychological drift, it demands a cognitive intervention.
Right. If being trapped between the unchangeable past and the terrifying future is what paralyzes us, the urgent question becomes,
how do we force the brain to stop time traveling?
exactly. How do we interrupt the sympathetic nervous system's threat response and force consciousness back into the safety of the present moment?
And that transition from diagnosing the panic to actively treating it brings us to Suleiman's core antidote, the concept of Dhikr, or remembrance.
But we have to fundamentally redefine what this practice actually entails.
Yeah, because in the modern context, words like remembrance or mantra or meditation have been heavily watered down.
They've been reduced to aesthetic practices rather than survival tools. They're put on coffee mugs and through pillows.
Right. So to reestablish the gravity of this, the source text provides a really striking metaphor. It states, Allah is like water is to the fish, oxygen to the human being.
It posits that this specific form of remembrance is what settles the heart and forcefully opens up those constricted neural and spiritual pathways.
Let's look closely at that metaphor, because oxygen to the human being is an extreme comparison. I mean, you generally don't spend your day thinking about oxygen.
Oh, no, you just breathe it.
You don't appreciate it. You don't hyperfixate on it. You just breathe it in the background while you worry about your 401k or your grocery list.
Right, until you can't.
Exactly.
Okay.
The second you are choking, the second you are caught in a rip current and pulled underwater or trapped in a room filled with smoke suddenly, oxygen is the single most important overriding priority of your entire existence.
The hierarchy of your needs violently collapses into one singular focal point.
You don't care about the embarrassing thing you said 5 years ago. You just need to breathe.
And Suleiman is saying that remembrance is the actual structural oxygen for a suffocating mind.
And this is where we have to clarify a massive misconception, right? one that the text itself explicitly addresses to prevent the practice from becoming totally useless.
Yes. Remembering, or Dhikr, is not simply repeating syllables on the tongue. It is not mindless chanting or passive repetition.
If you are just moving your lips, reciting a phrase, while your brain is still actively simulating tomorrow's stressful presentation,
Or agonizing over a past argument.
you are not breathing the oxygen. You are just holding your breath underwater and opening your mouth.
That's a terrifying image, but very accurate.
So what is the actual mechanism if it isn't just saying the words? How does this actually function as a cognitive behavioral tool that can stop a panic attack in its tracks?
The source outlines a very specific, intense, three-tiered cognitive process that demands full engagement. Step 1. You remember with the tongue.
So you physically articulate the word.
Yes. This provides a somatic anchor. You are doing something with your physical body in the present moment. Step 2. You think deeply about what you are saying.
Engaging your higher executive function.
The prefrontal cortex, exactly, to process the meaning of the words. And then step 3, you allow that meaning to penetrate the heart.
You take the intellectual concept and let it drop down into an emotional felt reality.
You align the physical action, the intellectual focus, and the emotional resonance all at once.
It's a complete, deliberate hijacking of the nervous system's bandwidth.
That is exactly what it is. Think about what anxiety does. It monopolizes your resources. Your body is tense, your mind is racing, your emotions are in a state of terror.
So this three-step process is a counteroffensive.
Exactly. You are giving the physical body an action, the tongue speaking. You are giving the racing mind a complex focal point, analyzing the deep theological meaning.
And then you are engaging the emotional center, the heart. You are intentionally occupying all the cognitive and somatic bandwidth that the anxiety was using to sustain the panic.
It's fascinating how closely this mirrors modern grounding techniques utilized in intense trauma therapy.
Oh, like the 5-4-3-2-1 method.
Yes. When a patient is dissociating or entering a severe flashback, a therapist doesn't just tell them to calm down, they engage them in grounding exercises.
Forcing them to name physical objects, acknowledge sensations.
Right. And engage their cognitive processing to literally pull blood flow away from the hyperactive amygdala, the fear center, and back into the prefrontal cortex.
And Suleiman is describing an ancient methodology that achieves this exact neurological rewiring. But it elevates it by anchoring it not just to a random object in the room,
But to a profound, absolute spiritual truth. You are replacing chaotic, branching, fractal thoughts of panic with a singular, stabilizing ultimate focus.
I really want to introduce a specific scenario here to test this concept, because I know when you are in the middle of a severe anxiety spiral, when you are looking at a foreclosure or a health crisis or a shattered relationship.
The idea of just remembering sounds flimsy.
It does. It sounds like telling someone with a broken femur to just remember what it's like to walk.
Yeah.
But let's look at this through a different lens.
Okay.
Imagine a pilot flying a small aircraft, and suddenly they enter a severe, violent storm cell. It is pitch black. The plane is shaking violently, lightning is flashing, and the wind is throwing the aircraft in every direction.
Terrifying.
Right. If that pilot looks out the window at the chaotic reality of the storm, their brain is going to panic. They will develop what is called spatial disorientation.
The inner ear gets confused by the G-forces. They won't know if they're flying upside down or straight up.
Exactly. And if they trust their panic senses, they will drive the plane straight into the ground.
Spatial disorientation is actually one of the leading causes of fatal aviation accidents. The human sensory system is simply not built to interpret reality accurately inside a violent, chaotic storm.
The inputs are just too overwhelming. So what are pilots rigorously trained to do the second they lose visibility?
They look at the dashboard.
Yes. They are trained to immediately tear their eyes away from the terrifying storm outside the window and forcefully lock their vision entirely onto their instrument panel inside the cockpit.
The artificial horizon, the altimeter, the heading indicator.
They have to intellectually and emotionally commit to trusting those instruments more than they trust their own panic-screaming senses.
That's powerful.
Dhikr, this deep, three-tiered remembrance, isn't just muttering a flimsy mantra to make yourself feel better. It is locking your eyes onto the ultimate instrument panel to navigate the storm.
It is a deliberate choice to trust the absolute truth of who is in control rather than the terrifying, chaotic illusion of the storm raging outside your window.
Because the storm is undeniable, right?
Mm-hmm.
The global circumstances, the financial ruin, the health problems, those are real, tangible threats.
But your perception of your ability to survive them, your spatial awareness in the storm, is wildly distorted by the panic.
Right.
The source text makes a profound, almost startling claim about the sheer power of this internal instrument panel. It states that in the worst of times, during the most extreme trials and tribulations to strike mankind, when the external world is entirely hostile, this deep remembrance will literally become your food and your drink.
Literally your food and your drink. That is a heavy, arresting statement. We're no longer just talking about managing daily stress.
No, we are talking about surviving times of absolute physical deprivation and terror.
Can the mind actually do that?
If we look at the broader landscape of human endurance and survival psychology, we have documented evidence that the human mind can sustain the physical body in ways that defy basic biological math.
Like Viktor Frankl's work.
Exactly. The psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps, he observed firsthand that individuals who maintained a profound internal locus of meaning, a deeply rooted spiritual or psychological anchor, could physically sustain themselves longer.
Even on the exact same starvation level caloric intake.
Yes. They could endure more torture than those who lost hope. Suleiman is describing a mental and spiritual framework that, through rigorous practice, becomes so deeply rooted that it provides actual physiological endurance.
When the external world offers you no sustenance, no safety, and no clear path forward, your internal anchor becomes your life force.
It is the ultimate unbreakable survival mechanism.
But there is an incredibly frustrating barrier to entry with this mechanism.
Yeah.
And it is something anyone who struggles with mental health will instantly recognize.
The experiential gap.
Exactly. Understanding the mechanics of this tool, understanding that you use the tongue, the mind, and the heart, understanding the pilot in the instrument panel, that is an intellectual exercise.
Right.
But fully comprehending its power, fully trusting that it will work for you when you are the one in the storm, that requires a leap that logic cannot provide. It's almost impossible to explain the peace of this practice to someone who is actively trapped in the panic.
It is the great insurmountable barrier of subjective experience, and what is remarkably empathetic about the source text is that Suleiman acknowledges this barrier directly.
He doesn't pretend it's easy.
Not at all. He says, point blank, you will not understand this state unless you have experienced it. He anticipates the skepticism of the modern mind.
You can just imagine a listener thinking, sure, just repeat these words, and magically my crushing debt or my profound grief will feel manageable. That sounds like a delusion.
And I deeply appreciate that he calls out that skepticism, because that is the default defense mechanism of the modern analytical mind.
We are conditioned to want tangible solutions.
Yes. We want a prescribed pill. We want a detailed spreadsheet. We want a 5-point, peer-reviewed action plan to fix our anxiety. We do not want to be told to immerse ourselves in remembrance. It feels too abstract.
But he remains absolute in his insistence on its efficacy. He states that you will not truly understand the station of the people of remembrance until you become one of them, until you actually immerse yourself in the practice.
And to bridge the gap between intellectual skepticism and experiential reality, he introduces a brilliant analogy centered around temperature.
Let's really spend some time on this temperature analogy, because for anyone who has ever felt locked on the outside of peace looking in, this is the master key to understanding why logic alone fails to cure anxiety.
It really is. So Suleiman proposes a thought experiment. Imagine you are standing outside a room and you are looking in through a heavy glass window. You can clearly observe the people inside.
Okay.
You watch their behavior, and you notice they're not sweating, they aren't aggressively fanning themselves, they aren't panting, their body language is completely relaxed.
So from these external observations, your brain engages in a logical deduction.
You deduce correctly, that room must be cool. But, and this is the critical defining distinction, you do not actually feel the coolness.
You only possess the intellectual knowledge that the coolness exists in that space.
Exactly. You cannot know the actual physiological temperature of the place unless you open the door and step inside of it.
This maps so perfectly onto the experience of chronic overthinking and anxiety. I mean, think about a time when you were having a panic attack or a severe depressive episode or just a really intense bout of overwhelming anxiety.
We've all been there.
And a well-meaning friend or family member comes up to you and says, hey, just calm down. Look on the bright side. Just take a deep breath. Everything is going to be fine.
Oh.
In that moment, that advice doesn't just feel unhelpful. It feels actively, deeply insulting.
It is infuriating. It often escalates the panic rather than soothing it.
Exactly. It makes you want to scream. And the temperature analogy perfectly explains the mechanics of why we react that way. Because the person telling you to just calm down is standing inside the cool room, looking out through the glass at you.
And you're standing outside, actively burning alive in a fire.
Yes, they're trying to hand you a logical deduction. See? Not being on fire is very relaxing, while you are suffering third-degree burns.
That's such a visceral way to describe it. And Suleiman is validating that infuriating reality. You cannot logic your way into this piece. You cannot deduce your way out of a panic attack using external observations.
You have to actively, intentionally step into the cool room yourself through the rigorous practice of remembrance.
It highlights the fundamental difference between reading an intricate textbook about the physics of swimming and actually jumping into the deep end of the pool.
Right. The water supports your body weight in a way that your mind simply cannot fathom while your feet are firmly planted on the concrete deck.
But Suleiman doesn't just leave this as a broad, abstract metaphor. He gives the listener a very specific experiential anchor to prove that they are capable of this state.
He points to the last 10 nights of Ramadan.
Yes. He says, if you want to know what this temperature drop feels like, go back in your own memory. Recall the last 10 nights of Ramadan when you were immersed in the masjid, engaged in deep remembrance.
He's not asking them to imagine a hypothetical piece.
No, he is pointing them to a specific, visceral memory of a piece they have already achieved. He asks them to examine that memory. How did your heart feel when you were in that state?
He is reminding the listener that they have felt this specific, profound atmospheric shift in their own chest before.
They have successfully stepped into the cool room in the past. They know intimately the reality of it.
And his crucial underlying point is a challenge, isn't it? That state of absolute tranquility, that massive drop in internal temperature, is not meant to be a seasonal novelty reserved only for the month of Ramadan.
No, it's meant to be accessible year-round. We are so guilty of compartmentalizing our peace. We build these rigid rules around our own mental health.
We really do. We think, oh, I only get to feel that level of calm when I am lying on a beach on vacation, or I only get to feel that deep spiritual connection during a major holiday, or when I am physically sitting inside a specific religious building.
We lock our peace to physical locations or calendar dates.
But Suleiman is saying the tools are entirely portable. The cool room isn't a geographical location. It is a cognitive and spiritual architecture that you build around yourself through your own intentional focus.
Which brings a profound sense of liberation to the listener. Consider how freeing it is to realize that you do not have to fully understand the intricate mechanics of the piece before you are allowed to achieve it.
You don't need a PhD in theology or neuroscience to stop a panic attack.
Exactly. You just have to trust the method and step into the environment. You just have to start the practice. Engage the tongue, focus the mind, open the heart, even if your analytical brain is highly skeptical.
You let the temperature of the practice do the work on your nervous system. You don't have to generate the piece. You just have to expose yourself to it.
I love the simplicity of that. You don't have to figure out how the HVAC system works before you enjoy the air conditioning. Just open the door and walk in.
Just walk in.
Yeah.
But of course, we don't live our entire lives in a meditative state inside a cool room. Eventually, you have to open the front door of your house and walk out into a world that is unpredictable, volatile, and often highly hostile.
That's where the real test begins.
Right. How does this internal anchor survive contact with reality? This is where the internal practice evolves into an external worldview, which brings us to the concept of tawakkul.
Shifting from existential panic to absolute, unshakable trust.
Yes. This is the critical transition from acute intervention to chronic resilience. How do you maintain the temperature when you step out into the heat?
The text introduces two foundational linguistic and conceptual anchors. Alhamdulillah, which translates to all praise is due to Allah.
And that carries the profound underlying implication that he is entirely flawlessly in control of all outcomes.
Exactly. And the second is Bismillah, meaning in the name of Allah, which is the active mechanism of trust you engage when stepping out your front door into the unpredictable variables of the world.
Okay, let's test these concepts against the friction of daily life. Because when the rubber meets the road and you have to go to a job where your boss is threatening layoffs.
Or you have to drive on a dangerous highway.
Or you have to navigate a complex healthcare system for a sick parent. How do these phrases actually function as a psychological shield?
Suleiman provides a massive psychological relief valve here by reminding the listener of a foundational theological premise. Allah does not burden a soul beyond its scope.
Meaning, even in the midst of massive complex trials, There is always a provision.
He gives us exactly what we can handle, no more and no less. And crucially, he always provides the specific tools necessary for success in that specific trial.
The logic is clear. If we were not provided with the tools to endure the burden, it would be unjust to hold us accountable for how we handle it.
Let's really look at the implications of that statement, because it is the ultimate targeted antidote to the suffocation we discussed at the very beginning.
Think about the anatomy of your panic when you feel entirely suffocated by your circumstances. It almost always stems from a perceived deficit.
Yes, you look at a problem, a mountain of debt, a devastating medical diagnosis, a shattered marriage, and you look at your own internal resources, and you genuinely believe the burden is heavier than your capacity to carry it.
You think, I literally, physically, and mentally cannot survive this. The panic is the friction between the immense weight of the problem and the perceived weakness of your shoulders.
That perceived deficit is the birthplace of despair. And the concept of tawakkul, of absolute active trust, completely shatters that deficit.
It does. It's the core, unshakable realization that if the burden has been placed in your life, you inherently possess the capacity or have been granted access to the specific tools to carry it.
You are never, under any circumstances, tasked with carrying a mountain you cannot lift.
But the real paradigm shift happens when we examine how we interact with the external environment once we leave the safety of our homes.
Right. Suleiman explains that when you walk out your front door and say Bismillah, you are verbally and cognitively acknowledging that you trust the ultimate provider for your physical sustenance and protection.
But then he delivers a line that I find absolutely staggering in its implications for modern anxiety. He says, if anything happens in the system that I perceive to be different, Allah has the keys.
The system, that is the operative, critical word in that sentence.
Yes, because if we step back and analyze modern society, it is deeply unsettling to realize just how much of our baseline psychological stability stems entirely from putting our absolute, unquestioning faith in incredibly fragile, human-made systems.
Oh, without a doubt. We are entirely dependent on these invisible architectures.
We trust the economic system and the banking sector to keep our life savings safe. We trust the corporate hierarchy and our employers to consistently provide the paycheck that keeps a roof over our heads.
We trust the complex logistical supply chain to ensure there is food on the grocery store shelves when we arrive.
We put almost all of our psychological, emotional, and even spiritual weight onto these volatile, human-made structures. And what happens?
A pandemic hits.
The stock market crashes. A massive layoff occurs. The system breaks. And because we mistakenly placed our ultimate faith in the system itself, when the system fails, we don't just experience an inconvenience.
We go into an absolute, terrifying, existential freefall.
We experience a total psychological collapse because our ultimate provider in our distorted mental framework has just failed us.
The God we worshipped, the economy, the career, the social status has proven to be mortal and flawed.
But Suleiman is proposing a radical, necessary recentering of our trust architecture. Tawakkul means recognizing that you live within the system, you must interact with the system, and you are accountable for using the tools given to you to navigate the system.
But your ultimate trust must never, ever be in the system.
It is the difference between leaning your entire body weight against the wall that is painted to look like solid stone but is actually made of cheap drywall versus leaning against a structural concrete pillar.
When the drywall inevitably gives way, you fall flat on your face.
But I want to challenge this idea because I can clearly hear the skeptic in our listener's head raising a very valid point.
Go ahead.
If I adopt this mindset, right? If I say Bismillah when leaving the house, if I cultivate this absolute trust, does that mean the bad things won't happen to me?
Right.
Does having tawakkul mean I am immune to being fired? Does it mean I won't get into a horrific car accident on my way to work? Does it mean my investments won't tank?
No, absolutely not. And that is exactly why the phrasing, if anything happens in the system that I perceive to be different, is so brilliant. It is an acknowledgement of inevitable friction.
Things will go wrong.
The system will periodically break. The trial, the fitna, will arrive at your doorstep. Tawakkul is not a superstitious magic spell designed to violently alter reality and prevent hardship.
It is a robust psychological and spiritual anchor specifically designed for when the hardship arrives.
Exactly. So Suleiman is arguing that if the system breaks, my trust remains entirely intact because my trust was never in the broken system to begin with.
My trust is in the one who holds the keys to the system. It fundamentally shifts the internal monologue we all run every morning.
Instead of walking out the door thinking, I desperately, frantically hope nothing goes wrong today because if my plans fail, I am completely destroyed.
You walk out thinking, I am going to do my best, but I am anchored to the ultimate authority no matter what goes wrong today.
It is the ultimate release valve for the crushing pressure of existential panic. You come to the profound realization that you are accountable for your own immediate actions.
You are responsible for using the tools in front of you, going to work, locking your doors, studying for the exam, being kind to your family.
But you are explicitly, wonderfully not responsible for controlling the universe.
The illusion of control is arguably the heaviest, most toxic burden the modern human mind attempts to carry.
We secretly believe that if we just worry enough, if we just analyze every possible negative outcome, we can somehow control the future and prevent pain.
Worrying is like sitting in a rocking chair, right? It gives you something to do, it expends a tremendous amount of energy, but it doesn't actually get you anywhere.
And it leaves you entirely exhausted in the process.
Giving up the illusion that you are the general manager of the universe is deeply, profoundly therapeutic. It is the exact moment that the constricted, suffocating chest finally expands. You breathe out, you look up, and you realize, I am not running the world, and that is okay.
But this naturally introduces a final, highly complex problem which we must address.
Okay, what's that?
Relinquishing the illusion of control is incredibly freeing when you are enduring a clear hardship. But what happens when the path forward is not just difficult, but entirely obscured?
Oh, when you don't even know what to do.
Exactly. What happens when these trials, this fitna, create a landscape of such intense chaos, ambiguity, and confusion that you don't even know what the right next step is?
How do you use the tools of success when the lights go out and you can't even see the workbench?
Precisely. This is such a critical pivot. We need to explore actionable antidotes to deep confusion and doubt.
Because let's be fiercely honest about the human experience. Life isn't just hard, it is incredibly, frustratingly complicated. Sometimes the anxiety that keeps us up at night isn't the fear of a clearly bad thing happening, it is the agonizing paralysis of having no idea what choice to make.
Do I take the risky new job or stay in the stable, soul-crushing one?
Do I try to salvage this toxic relationship or do I finally walk away? How do I navigate a bitter family conflict where every single person involved seems to be both right and wrong at the same time?
The text explicitly identifies this state as fitna trials that are characterized by intense confusion, where the truth is obscured and you are entirely unable to sort things out properly.
This is the phenomenon of cognitive paralysis, born entirely of complexity. When life becomes a chaotic knot of gray areas, the human brain's natural, evolved tendency is to freeze.
We enter an intense calculation mode. We try to perfectly map out our next move, playing out 100 different chess moves in advance,
Trying to perfectly predict the outcome to avoid making a catastrophic mistake.
And because the situation is inherently confusing and unpredictable, the calculation inevitably fails. The algorithm cannot compute. And so we remain frozen in a state of terrified inaction.
We find ourselves right back in the state of incapacity and laziness that we diagnosed in the very beginning. But this time, the paralysis isn't caused by grief or fear of the future.
It is caused by the sheer weight of doubt.
The mechanism of the freeze is the same, but the trigger is different. So how do we break this specific type of paralysis?
Suleiman cites a profound, incisive piece of advice from the Prophet Muhammad. It functions as a behavioral circuit breaker. The first directive is, leave that which causes you doubt and immerse yourself in that which causes you no doubt.
Let's dissect the first half of that. Leave that which causes you doubt. That is entirely counterintuitive to how we normally operate.
It really is. In a state of high anxiety and confusion, our instinct is to obsess over the very thing that is confusing us.
We stare at the tangled knot, we pull at the strings, we try to forcefully untangle it with our minds, and we usually just end up making the knot tighter and making ourselves more frantic.
We hyperfixate on the ambiguity because we crave resolution. We stare into the fog. But the advice is a directive to forcefully step away from the cognitive dissonance.
Stop trying to solve the unsolvable equation.
Stop trying to outthink a scenario that lacks clear data. Instead, immediately redirect your focus and immerse yourself in what is absolute, clear, and undeniably unclouded.
Which connects seamlessly to the second part of the advice Suleiman shares. And this is arguably the most stunningly practical, actionable takeaway of this entire exploration.
Yes. He says, when fitna comes, when the fog of confusion surrounds you and you absolutely cannot figure out the best course of action regarding the major decisions in your life, Do not stop exerting yourself.
Do not surrender to the freeze response.
Instead, rush to do good deeds.
If we evaluate this through the lens of modern behavioral psychology and trauma recovery, this is a brilliant, neurologically sound strategy to shatter the freeze response.
It is. When you are paralyzed by a complex macro-level problem, a looming career crisis, a paralyzing fear of global tragedy, a massive, unresolvable interpersonal conflict, your internal sense of agency feels completely stripped away.
You feel entirely powerless at the mercy of massive forces you cannot control or comprehend.
Yes, you feel incredibly small, irrelevant, and entirely stuck in the mud. So how do you systematically regain that lost sense of agency?
You cannot do it by instantly solving the macro problem, because the macro problem is currently unsolvable.
You regain agency by executing a micro-level, undeniable action of positive momentum. You exert your limited energy in a space where, without a shadow of a doubt that the action is inherently good, clear, and blessed.
Think about the last time you were awake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, obsessing over a massive life choice. Your brain was spinning its wheels trying to solve a 10-year macro problem in the dark. It is agonizing.
It really is.
What this framework suggests is radically simple. Stop trying to perfectly calculate the outcome of the unsolvable problem right that second. Give yourself permission to put it down.
Instead, the very next morning, wake up and go help a neighbor carry their groceries.
Pay for the coffee of the tired person standing behind you in line. Call a relative who you know is lonely and just listen to them. Donate $20 to a cause you fundamentally believe in.
Go do one singular, undeniable, tangible good deed.
On the surface, it sounds almost too simple. It can easily be dismissed as a generic, feel-good, religious cliché.
But neurologically and psychologically, it is a profound intervention. Forward momentum in any positive, undeniable direction fundamentally breaks the paralysis of doubt.
It forcefully removes you from your internal, echoing labyrinth of anxiety and forces you to interact with the external, physical world in a way that generates immediate, observable, undeniable value.
It triggers the release of dopamine associated with task completion and altruism, which helps reboot the executive function of the brain.
It is the ultimate bridge between the internal and the external. Earlier, we analyzed Dhikr, deep remembrance, as the internal anchor.
That practice is the instrument panel that keeps you oriented in the storm. It provides the oxygen to your suffocating mind.
But then, rushing to do good deeds is the external engine that drives you forward. The internal anchor keeps you from dying in the storm, and the external good deed provides the physical momentum to eventually fly out of it.
You don't have to perfectly map the entire 500-mile journey out of the dark forest. You just have to take one clearly illuminated, undeniable step forward.
And that single, clear step reestablishes your fundamental agency. It proves to your own panic-frozen brain that you are not, in fact, entirely incapacitated.
You are still capable of movement. You are still capable of generating goodness. You still have power.
And quite often, engaging in that one clear action provides just enough psychological clarity, just enough of a temperature drop to make the next difficult, ambiguous decision slightly easier to navigate.
You begin to untangle the paralyzing fitna, not by outthinking it in a dark room, but by outacting it with undeniable goodness in the light.
It is a radically empowering posture to take toward your own life. You forcefully shift your identity from being a helpless victim of confusing, overwhelming circumstances to being an active, deliberate agent of clarity and light.
It entirely rewrites your fundamental relationship with the unpredictable world. You are no longer cowering in your home, exhaustingly trying to control all variables, waiting in terror for the fragile system to break.
You are deeply anchored in tawakkul, trusting the keyholder. You are breathing the steady oxygen of remembrance, and you are actively, confidently seeking out the next good deed, entirely regardless of the storm raging around you.
This has been an incredibly profound journey. We have traversed the entire landscape of the modern anxious mind.
We started by validating the very real, terrifying physiological reality of psychological suffocation. That constricted chest caused by the crushing cognitive load of past grief and future panic.
We examined how that paralysis is an alarm bell, warning us that we have lost our anchor.
We then explore the life-giving three-tiered cognitive intervention of deep remembrance, learning how to lock onto our ultimate instrument panel when spatial disorientation sets in.
We acknowledge the frustrating barrier of subjective experience, validating that you cannot deduce peace from the outside. You must trust the process and step into the cool room yourself.
We then systematically dismantled the illusion of control, shifting our fragile trust away from brittle human systems and placing it entirely in the unshakable architecture of tawakkul.
And finally, we found the practical cure for the paralysis of profound confusion. Intentionally breaking the cycle of doubt by redirecting our energy into undeniable micro-level good deeds, reclaiming our agency one positive step at a time.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to leave you with one final perspective shift to mull over in your own time. We've spent this entire deep dive analyzing that terrifying feeling of the constricted chest.
The absolute suffocation of anxiety that wakes you up on an ordinary Tuesday morning, a feeling that demands our deepest empathy and our most rigorous tools.
But consider this entirely different paradigm. What if your next wave of overwhelming, paralyzing anxiety is not a catastrophic sign that your life is falling apart?
What if that constricted chest is not a punishment for your failures, and it is not a permanent, unchangeable state of your being?
What if it is, in fact, the exact, brilliantly designed physiological signal reminding you that you are currently trying to breathe underwater? What if that rising panic is not an enemy to be feared, but rather the ultimate, urgent, loving invitation to finally surface, to take a deep, life-giving breath of remembrance, and to once and for all let go of the exhausting, impossible illusion that you ever had to control the ocean?